Week.
Well, what's happening? Good to see you.
You too?
What's going on?
Chill week.
Yeah, sort of. This recent announcement that you did about content moderation, how has that been received?
Probably depends on who you ask.
Right.
But look, I've been working on this for a long time. So, you got to do what you think is right. We've been on a long journey here, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's I think at some level you only start one of these companies if you believe in giving people a voice, right? The whole point of social media is basically, giving people the ability to share what they want.
Right.
And it goes back to, our original mission is just give people the power to share and make the world more open and connected.
What do you think started the pathway towards increasing censorship? Because clearly we were going in that direction for the last few years. It seemed like we really found out about it when Elon bought Twitter and we got the Twitter files, and when you came on here and when you were explaining the relationship with FBI, where they were trying to get you to take down certain things that were true and real, and certain things they tried to get you to limit the exposure to them. So it's these kind of conversations. Like, when did all that start?
Yeah, well, look, I think going back to the beginning, or like I was saying, I think you start one of these if you care about giving people a voice. I wasn't too deep on our content policies for like the first 10 years of the company. It was just kind of well known across the company that we were trying to give people the ability to share as much as possible. And issues would come up, practical issues, right? So if someone's getting bullied, for example, we deal with that, or we put in place systems to fight bullying.
Right.
If someone is saying, hey, someone's pirating copyrighted content on the service, it's like, okay, we'll build controls to make it so we'll find IP-protected content. But it was really in the last 10 years that people started pushing for like ideological-based censorship. And I think it was two main events that really triggered this. In 2016, there was the election of President Trump, also coincided with basically Brexit in the EU and sort of the fragmentation of the EU. And then, in 2020, there was COVID. And I think that those were basically these two events where for the first time, we just faced this massive institutional pressure to basically start censoring content on ideological grounds.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but when it first came up in 2016, did it come under the guise of the Russian collusion hoax?
And this is the thing. At the time, I was really sort of ill-prepared to kind of parse what was going on, right? It's, I think part of my reflection looking back on this is I kind of think in 2016, in the aftermath, I gave too much deference to a lot of folks in the media who were basically saying, okay, there's no way that this guy could have gotten elected except for misinformation. People can't actually believe this stuff, right? It has to be that there's this kind of like massive misinformation out there. Some of it started with the Russia collusion stuff, but it kind of morphed into different things over time.
Well, he was so ideologically polarizing, right? Like, people didn't want to believe that anybody looked at him and said, this should be our president.
Yeah, so I took this and just kind of assumed that everyone was acting in good faith. And I said, okay, well, there are concerns about misinformation. We should, just like when people raised other concerns in the past and we try to deal with them, okay, yeah, people, no, if you ask people, no one says that they want misinformation, so maybe there's something that we should do to basically try to address this. But I was really worried from the beginning about basically becoming this sort of decider of what is true in the world, right? That's like kind of a crazy position to be in for billions of people using your service. And so we tried to put in place a system that would deal with it. And early on tried to basically make it so that it was really limited. We're like, all right, we're just going to have this system where there's these third-party fact checkers and they can check the worst of the worst stuff, right? So things that are very clear hoaxes, that there's like, it's not like we're not parsing speech about whether something is slightly true or slightly false, like Earth is flat, things like that, right? So that was sort of the original intent. We put in place the system and it just sort of veered from there. I think to some degree, it's because some of the people whose job is to do fact checking, a lot of their industry is focused on political fact checking. So they just kind of veered in that direction. And we kept on trying to basically get it to be what we had originally intended, which is just, it's not, the point isn't to like judge people's opinions. It's to provide this layer to kind of help fact check some of the stuff that seems the most extreme, but it just, it was just never accepted by people broadly. I think people just felt like the fact checkers were too biased. Not necessarily even so much in what they ruled, although sometimes I think people would disagree with that. A lot of the time, it was just what types of things they chose to even go and fact check in the first place. So, I kind of think like after having gone through that whole exercise, it I don't know, it's something out of like 1984, one of these books where it's just like it really is a slippery slope. And it just got to a point where it's just, okay, this is destroying so much trust, especially in the United States, to have this program. And I guess it was probably about a few years that I really started coming to the conclusion that we were going to need to change something about that. COVID was the other big one, where that was also very tricky because, at the beginning it was, it's like a legitimate public health crisis, in the beginning. And it's, even people who are like the most ardent First Amendment, defenders, the Supreme Court has this clear precedent that's like, all right, you can't yell fire in a crowded theater. There are times when if there's an emergency, your ability to speak can temporarily be curtailed in order to get an emergency under control. So I was sympathetic to that at the beginning of COVID. It seemed like, okay, you have this virus. It seems like it's killing a lot of people. I don't know, we didn't know at the time how dangerous it was going to be. So at the beginning, it kind of seemed like, okay, we should give a little bit of deference to the government and the health authorities on how we should play this. But when it went from, 2 weeks to flatten the curve to, and like in the beginning, it was like, okay, there aren't enough masks. Masks aren't that important. To then it's like, oh no, you have to wear a mask. And, everything was shifting around. It just became very difficult to kind of follow. And this really hit the most extreme, I'd say, during the Biden administration when they were trying to roll out the vaccine program. And now, I'm generally like pretty pro rolling out vaccines. I think on balance, the vaccines are more positive than negative. But I think that while they're trying to push that program, they also tried to censor anyone who is basically arguing against it. And they pushed super hard to take down things that were true, right? I mean, they basically pushed us and said, anything that says that vaccines might have side effects, you basically need to take down. And I was just like, well, we're not going to do that. Like, we're clearly not going to do that. I mean, that is kind of inarguably true.
Who is they? Who's telling you to take down things that
it was
that talk about vaccine side effects?
It was people in the Biden administration. I think it was I wasn't involved in those conversations directly, but I think it was.
How difficult is that to not be involved in those conversations directly? Fitness isn't just about what you do in the gym, it's also about your nutrition, but Eve Gap and of why free with your fixed dom running the company. But seriously, get on this. That's got to be strange too, right? Because you're running the company, but there's clearly you're moderating at scale that's beyond the imagination. The number of human beings you're moderating is fucking insane. Like, what's a Facebook? How many people use it on a daily basis? Forget about how many overall. Like, how many people use it regularly?
It's 3.2 billion people use one of our services every day. It's wild.
More than a third of the planet. That's so crazy.
Yeah, and it's
almost half of Earth.
Well, on a monthly basis, it is probably half. Of it. But
I want to say that though, for there's a lot of like hypercritical people that are conspiracy theorists and think that everybody's a part of some cabal to control them. I want you to understand that whether it's YouTube or all these, whatever place that you think is doing something that's awful, it's good that you speak, because this is how things get changed, and this is how people find out that people are upset about content moderation and censorship. But moderating at scale is insane.
Yeah.
It's insane.
Yeah.
What we were talking the other day about the number of videos that go up every hour on YouTube, and it's bananas. It's bananas. It's like to try to get a human being that is reasonable, logical, and objective that's going to analyze every video. It's virtually impossible. It's not possible. So you got to use a bunch of tools. You're going to get a bunch of things wrong.
Yeah.
And you have also people reporting things. And how much is that going to affect things? You could have mass reporting because you have bad actors. You have some corporation that decides we're going to attack this video because it's bad for us, get it taken down.
Mm-hmm.
There's so much going on. I want to put that in people's heads before we go on. Like, understand the kind of numbers that we're talking about here. Now understand you have the pandemic, and then you have the administration that's doing something where I think they crossed the line, where it gets really weird, where they're saying what you were saying. They were trying to get you to take down vaccine side effects, which is just crazy.
Yeah, so, I mean, like you're saying, I mean, it's so complicated, this system, that I could spend every minute of all of my time doing this and not actually focused on building any of the things that we're trying to do. AI, glasses, like the future of social media, all that stuff. So, I mean, I get involved in this stuff, but in general, we have a policy team. There are people who I trust. They're the people who are kind of working on this on a day-to-day basis. And the interactions that I was just referring to, I mean, a lot of this is documented. I mean, because Jim Jordan and the House had this whole investigation and committee into the kind of government censorship around stuff like this. We produced all these documents, and it's all in the public domain. I mean, basically, these people from the Biden administration would call up our team and like scream at them, and curse, and it's like these documents it's all kind of out there.
Did you record any of those phone calls?
I don't think we were, but I think
I want to listen.
I mean, there are emails. the emails are published. It's all kind of out there, and they're like, and basically it just got to this point where we were like, no, we're not gonna take down things that are true. That's ridiculous. They wanted us to take down this meme of Leonardo DiCaprio looking at a TV talking about how 10 years from now or something, you're gonna see an ad that says, okay, if you took a COVID vaccine, you're eligible for, for this kind of payment, like this sort of like class action lawsuit type meme. And they're like, no, you have to take that down. And we said, no, we're not going to take down humor and satire. We're not going to take down things that are true. And then at some point, I guess, I don't know, it flipped a bit. I mean, Biden, when he gave some statement at some point, I don't know if it was a press conference or to some journalists, where he basically was like, these guys are killing people. And I don't know, then like all these different agencies and branches of government basically just like started investigating and coming after our company. It was brutal. It was brutal.
Wow. Yeah. It's just a massive overstepping.
Yeah,
and,
well,
and
I mean,
also,
I think
you weren't killing people. This is the thing about all of this. It's like they suppressed so much information about things that people should be doing, regardless of whether or not you believe in the vaccine. Regardless, put that aside. Metabolic health is of the utmost importance in your everyday life, whether there's a pandemic or there's not. And there's a lot of things that you can do that can help you recover from illness. It prevents illnesses. It makes your body more robust and healthy. It strengthens your immune system. And they were suppressing all that information. And that's just crazy. You can't say you're one of the good guys if you're suppressing information that would help people recover from all kinds of diseases, not just COVID, the flu, common cold, all sorts of different things, high doses of vitamin C, D3 with K2 and magnesium. They were suppressing this stuff because they didn't want people to think that you could get away with not taking a vaccine, which is really crazy when you're talking about something that 99.07% of people survive. This is a crazy overstep, but scared the shit out of a lot of people. red pilled, as it were, a lot of people because they realize like, oh, 1984 is like an instruction manual. I mean, it's like it shows you how things can go that way with wrong speak and with bizarre distortion of facts. And when it comes down to it, in today's day and age, the way people get information is through your platform, through X. This is how people are getting information. They're getting information from YouTube. They're getting information from a bunch of different sources now. And you can't censor that if it's real legitimate information because it's not ideologically convenient for you.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's basically the journey that I've been on. Right, started off very pro free speech, free expression, and then over the last 10 years, there have been these two big episodes. It was the Trump election and the aftermath, where I feel like in retrospect, I deferred too much to the kind of critique of the media on what we should do. Mm-hmm. And since then, I think generally trust in media has fallen off a cliff, right? So I don't think I'm alone in that journey. I think that's basically the experience that a lot of people have had is, okay, it's the stuff that's being written about is not kind of all accurate. And even if the facts are right, it's kind of written from a slant a lot of the time.
Of course.
And then there was the government version of it, which is during COVID, which is, okay, like, it's like our government is telling us that we need to censor true things. It's like, this is a disaster. And it's not just the U.S., right? I think a lot of people in the U.S. focus on this as an American phenomenon, but I kind of think that the reaction to COVID probably caused a breakdown in trust in a lot of governments around the world. Because 2024 was a big election year around the world, and there are all these countries, India, just like a ton of countries that had elections, and the incumbents basically lost every single one. So there is some sort of a global phenomenon where the whether it was because of inflation, because of the economic policies to deal with COVID, or just how the governments dealt with COVID, seems to have had this effect that's global, not just the U.S., but like a very broad decrease in trust, at least in that set of incumbents, and maybe in sort of these democratic institutions overall. So I think that what you're saying, how do people get their information now? It's by sharing it online on social media. I think that that's just increasingly true. And my view at this point is like, all right, like we started off focused on free expression. We kind of had this pressure tested over the last period. I feel like I just have a much greater command now of what I think the policies should be. And like, this is how it's going to be going forward. And so I mean, at this point, I think a lot of people look at this as like a purely political thing. It's because they kind of look at the timing and they're like, hey, well, you're doing this right after the election. It's like, okay, I try not to like change our content rules like right in the middle of an election either, right? It's like there's not like a great time to do this. It's
right. And you want to do it a year later.
Yeah, it's like there's no good time to do it. There's, right. And whatever time is going on, there's going to be, so. The good thing about doing it after the election is you get to take this kind of cultural pulse as like, okay, where are people right now, and how are people thinking about it? We try to have policies that reflect, mainstream discourse. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. This is something I've been thinking about for a while. I think that this is going to be pretty durable because at this point we've just been pressure tested on this stuff for like the last 8 to 10 years with like these huge institutions just pressuring us, and I feel like this is kind of the right place to be going forward.
What was it like when they were attacking you? Like, first of all, what was the premise? Like, what were they saying was your offense? Was it that you were allowing information that was not true, that was getting out there? I know there was also, they're saying that you guys were allowing hate groups to speak. There was a lot of this.
Yeah. I mean, the tough thing with politics is that there's like, well, when you say someone's coming after you, are you referring to kind of the government and investigations and all that? I mean, so the issue is that there's what specific thing an agency might be looking into you for, and then there's like the underlying political motivation, which is like, why do the people who are running this thing hate you? And I think that those can often be two very different things. So, and we had organizations that were looking into us that were like not really involved with social media, like I think like the CFPB, like this financial I don't even know what it stands for. It's the financial organization that Elizabeth Warren had set up.
Oh, great!
And it's basically, it's like, we're not a bank.
The
right? We're not
debanking section.
Yeah, no. So
Yeah.
like we're not a bank, right? It's like what does Meta have to do with this? But they kind of found some theory that they wanted to investigate, and it's like, okay, clearly they were trying really hard, right, to like find some theory, but it, like, I don't know, it kind of, like, throughout the party and the government, there was just sort of, I don't know how this stuff works. I mean, I've never been in government. I don't know if it's like a directive or it's just like a quiet consensus that, like, we don't like these guys, they're not doing what we want, we're gonna punish them. But it's tough to be at the other end of that.
What was it like?
Well, it's not good. I think. Well, the thing that I think is actually the toughest, though, is it's global, right? So, and really, when you think about it, the U.S. government should be defending its companies, right? Not be the tip of the spear attacking its companies. So we talk about a lot. Okay, what is the experience of? Okay, if the U.S. government comes after you, I think the real issue is that when the U.S. government does that to its tech industry, it's basically just open season around the rest of the world. Right? I mean, the EU, I pulled these numbers. The EU has fined the tech companies more than $30 billion over the last, I think it was like 10 or 20 years.
Holy shit!
So when you think about it, like, okay, it's like, $100 million here, a couple $1 billion there. But what it, I think, really adds up to is this is sort of like a kind of EU-wide policy for how they want to deal with American tech. It's almost like a tariff. And I think the U.S. government basically gets to decide how are they going to deal with that, right? Because if the U.S. government, if some other country was screwing with another industry that we cared about, the U.S. government would probably find some way to put pressure on them. But I think what happened here is actually the complete opposite. The U.S. government led the kind of attack against the companies, which then just made it so, like, the EU is basically, and all these other places, just free to just go to town on all the American companies and do whatever you want. But I mean, look, obviously, like, I don't want to come across as if, like, we don't have things that we need to do better. Obviously, we do. And when we mess something up, we deserve to be held accountable for that, and just like everyone else. I do think that the American technology industry is a bright spot in the American economy. I think it's a strategic advantage for the United States that we have a lot of the strongest companies in the world. And I think it should be part of the U.S.'s strategy going forward to defend that. And it's one of the things that I'm optimistic about with President Trump is I think he just wants America to win. And I think some of this stuff, like the other governments who are kind of pushing on this stuff, it's like, at least the U.S. has the rule of law, right? So the government can come after you for something, but you still get your day in court, and the courts are pretty fair. And so we've basically done a pretty good job of defending ourselves. And when we've chosen to do that, basically we have a pretty good rate of winning. It's just not like that in every other country around the world. Like, if other governments decide that they're gonna go after you, you don't always get kind of a clear shake at kind of defending yourself on the rules. So I think to some degree, if the U.S. tech industry is going to continue being really strong, I do think that the U.S. government has a role in basically defending it abroad. And that's one of the things that I'm optimistic about will happen in this administration.
Well, I think this administration uniquely has felt the impact of not being able to have free speech. Because this is the administration where Trump was famously kicked off of Twitter. That was a huge issue. Like, after January 6th, like, they removed at the time, the sitting president. It was kind of crazy to remove that person from social media because you've decided that he incited a riot. So for him, without free speech, without podcasts, without social media, they probably wouldn't have had a chance because the mainstream narrative, other than Fox News, was so clearly against him. The majority of the television entities and print entities were against him, the majority of them. So if without social media, without podcasts, they don't stand a chance. So they're uniquely aware of the importance of giving people their voice, free speech. But you do have to be careful about misinformation, and you do have to be careful about just outright lies and propaganda complaints, or propaganda campaigns rather. And how do you differentiate?
Well, I think that there are a couple of different things here. One is, this is something where I think X and Twitter just did it better than us on fact-checking. We took the critique around around misinformation. We put in place this fact-checking program, which basically empowered these third-party fact-checkers. They could mark stuff false, and then we would downrank it in the algorithm. I think what Twitter and X have done with community notes, I think is just a better program. Rather than having a small number of fact-checkers, you get the whole community to weigh in. When people who usually disagree on something tend to agree on how they're voting on a note, that's a good sign to the community that there's actually like a broad consensus on this, and then you show it. And you're showing more information, not less, right? So you're not using the fact check as a signal to show less. You're using the community note to provide real context and show additional information. So I think that that's better. For when you're talking about like nation states or people interfering, a lot of that stuff is best rooted out at the level of kind of accounts doing phony things. So you get like, whether it's like China or Russia or Iran or like one of these countries, they'll set up these networks of fake accounts and bots, and they coordinate and they post on each other's stuff to make it seem like it's authentic and kind of convince people it's like, wow, a bunch of people must think this or something. And the way that you identify that is you build AI systems that can basically detect that those accounts are not behaving the way that a human would. And when we find that there's like some bot that's operating an account.
How do you differentiate? How do you figure that out?
It just, I mean, there are some things that a person just would never do, right? So,
have you met Lex Friedman?
yes,
yeah, right.
yeah.
He might not be.
Well, but is he going to
take?
But is he going to take? Yeah, no. Is he going to take him? Is he going to make a million actions in a minute? It's like, yeah, probably not.
Okay, so it's that.
Well, I mean, it's
things that aren't
it's more
possible.
subtle than that. I think like these guys are pretty sophisticated, and it's an adversarial space. So, so we find some technique, and then they basically kind of update their techniques. But we have a team of it's effectively like intelligence, counterintelligence folks, counterterrorism folks, AI folks who are building systems to identify what are these accounts that are just not behaving the way that people would, and how are they interacting, and then sometimes you trace it down, and sometimes you get some tips from different intelligence agencies, and then you can kind of piece together over time. It's like, oh, this network of people is actually some kind of fake cluster of accounts, and that's against our policies, and then we just take them all off. But
how are you sure? Like, is there a 100% certainty
that
you are definitely getting a group of people that are bad actors, or is it just people that have unpopular opinions?
No, I don't think it's that for this. I think.
But what I'm saying is, how do you determine?
Yeah.
Like, how do you at what percentage of accuracy are you determining it? Do you ever accidentally think that people that are going to get moderated are actually just real people?
Yes, I think for the specific problem around these like large coordinated groups doing kind of like election interference or something, it's a large enough group. We have like a bunch of people analyzing it. It's like they study it for a while. I think we're probably pretty accurate on that. But I actually think one of the bigger issues that we have in our moderation system is this precision issue that you're talking about. And that is actually, of all the things that we announced this week, in terms of how we're going to update the content policies, changing the content filters to have to require higher confidence and precision is actually going to be the thing that reduces the vast majority of the censorship mistakes that we make, right? Removing the fact checkers and replacing them with community notes, I think it's a good step forward. Like a very small % of content is fact checked in the first place. So is that going to make the hugest difference? I'm not sure. I think it'll be a positive step though. And we like opened up some content policies. So some stuff that was restricted before we opened up. Okay, that's good. It'll mean that some set of things that might've been censored before are not. But by far the biggest set of issues we have, and you and I have talked about a bunch of issues like this over the years, is like, it's just, okay, you have some classifier it's trying to find, say, like drug content, right? People decide, okay, it's like the opioid epidemic is a big deal. We need to do a better job of cracking down on drugs and drug sales, right? I don't want people dealing drugs on our networks. So we build a bunch of systems that basically go out and try to automate finding people who are dealing drugs. And then you basically have this question, which is how precise do you want to set the classifier? So do you want to make it so that the system needs to be 99% sure that someone is dealing drugs before taking them down? Do you want it to be 90% confident, 80% confident? And then those correspond to amounts of, I guess the statistics term would be recall. What percent of the bad stuff are you finding? So if you require 99% confidence, then
Feel free to browse.
maybe you only actually end up taking down 20% of the bad content. Whereas if you reduce it and you say, okay, we're only going to require 90% confidence, now maybe you can take down 60% of the bad content. But let's say you say, no, we really need to find everyone who's doing this bad thing. And it doesn't need to be as severe as dealing drugs. It could just be, it could be any kind of content of, any kind of category of harmful content. You start getting to some of these classifiers might have 80, 85% precision in order to get 90% of the bad stuff down. But the problem is if you're at 90% precision, that means 1 out of 10 things that the classifier takes down is not actually problematic. And if you filter, if you kind of multiply that across the billions of people who use our services every day, that is millions and millions of posts that are basically being taken down that are innocent, and upon review, we're going to look at and be like, this is ridiculous that this thing got taken down, which, I think you've had that experience, and we've talked about this for a bunch of stuff over time. And but it really just comes down to this question of where do you want to set the classifiers? So one of the things that we're going to do is basically set them to be require more confidence, which is this trade-off. It's going to mean that we will maybe take down a smaller amount of the harmful content, but it will also mean that we'll dramatically reduce the amount of people whose accounts we're taking off for a mistake, which is just a terrible experience, right? It's like, okay, you're going about your day, and then one day you wake up and you're like, oh, my WhatsApp account just got deactivated because it's connected to a Facebook account, and the Facebook account is or like I'm using it on the same phone as a Facebook account where like we made some enforcement mistake and thought you were doing something bad that you weren't because our classifiers were set to too low of precision.
Has that happened before?
Oh yeah.
Where their WhatsApp app got canceled as well?
Yeah, because there are a
so
bunch
if your
of
Facebook app gets taken out, like say if you have a Facebook and you have like a sock puppet account, and the sock puppet account you post offensive memes and you're generally gross.
Yeah.
If you get caught for that, does your WhatsApp get killed?
Not for memes, but go back to like a very severe thing. Like let's say
Okay.
someone is
Terrorists. Let's say the most
yeah,
severe.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay.
Let's say someone is like terrorist content. They're planning some attack.
Right.
Okay. So we take down their account, right? But then let's say that person can just go then sign up with another account. Right. I think like,
How does WhatsApp get connected to that, though?
Oh, well, if it's, I mean, we run these different services, and if they're on the same phone, it's basically, it's one thing that, it's basically regulators or governments will come to us and say, okay, you're clearly not doing enough if you kick someone off for terrorism, and then they can just like sign up for another account on the phone.
Right.
Okay, they also think, okay, well, we're not doing enough if we deactivate their Facebook account because they're like planning a terrorist attack, but we let them use all our other services.
Right.
Right.
If
So,
you're
okay.
aware. Yeah.
Yeah. So if our systems think that someone is a terrorist, then you probably need to deactivate their access to all the different accounts.
Yeah, they can't get on Threads. just not
Threads, Instagram. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
that makes sense.
So you can understand how you get there, but then you just get to this question around the precision and the confidence level, and then you're just making all these mistakes at scale, and it's just unacceptable. But I think it's a very hard calculation of like where do you want to be, because on the one hand, like I get it why people kind of come to us and they're like, no, you need to do a better job finding more of the terrorism or the drugs and all this stuff. But over time, the technology will get better and it'll get more precise. But at any given point in time, that's the choice that we have to make: is do we want to make more mistakes, erring on the side of just like blowing away innocent people's accounts,
Right.
or do we want to get a somewhat higher percent of the bad stuff off? And I think that there's some balance that you need to strike on this.
We were having a conversation yesterday, Mel Gibson and I, about how that can get weird. Or was it Theo? It might have been Theo. I think it was Theo. Where that can get weird because I think, like, if you're a person and you work at some accounting firm, but you like posting about stuff, but you don't want it to come back and reflect on your life, you want to shit post, you want to post jokes, you want to be silly, you should be able to be anonymous. I think there's nothing wrong with that. I don't think just because you state your opinion, people should be able to search where you sleep. That doesn't make any sense to me. But if you're going to allow anonymous accounts, you're definitely going to open up the door to bad actors having enormous blocks of accounts where they can use either AI or just programs where they have like specific answers. I'm sure you've seen that before. It's come up on Twitter multiple times where they've found hundreds of sock puppet accounts tweeting the exact same thing. So you've literally word for word, even certain words in caps, like either people are copy or pasting it, or there's an email campaign that's getting legitimate people to do it, or these are fake people. You're going to have, if you're going to have anonymous accounts, which I think you should, because I think whistleblowers, I think the benefits of anonymous reporting on important things that the general public needs to know about, especially whistleblower type stuff, you have to have some ability to be anonymous. But if you're going to do that, you're also going to have the possibility that these aren't real people, that these are paid actors, these are paid people, or not people at all, or they're running programs, and they're doing this to try to sway public opinion about very important issues.
Yeah. A lot of what we've seen too, I mean, so there's the anonymous accounts. Also, just over time, I think a lot of the kind of more interesting conversations have shifted from the public sphere to more private ones. So WhatsApp groups, private groups on Facebook. I'm sure you have this experience where like maybe 10 years ago you would have posted your kind of quick takes on whatever social media you were using. Now, the stuff that I post on Facebook and Instagram, it's like I put time into making sure that that's kind of good content that I want to be seen broadly.
Yes.
And then like most of the jokes that I make are like with my friends in WhatsApp, right? In groups.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's kind of where the world is more broadly now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I think so for jokes, for that kind of stuff, for comedians for sure. Because also we'll say things that we don't really mean. We just say it because it's a funny thing to say.
I think everyone does.
For sure. Yeah. Which is just a weird thing about taking things out of context, particularly on social media where people love to do that. But there is this problem of, like, let's just say that you're a country that's involved in some sort of an international conflict, and you have this ability to get out this fake narrative and just spread it widely about all sorts of things you're accusing this other government of, all sorts of things that aren't true.
Yeah.
And it just muddies the water of reality for a lot of people.
Yeah, and that's why that side of things, the kind of governments running these broad manipulation campaigns, I mean, we're not letting off the gas on that at all. I think most categories of bad stuff that we're policing, everyone agrees is bad, right? No one's sitting there defending that terrorism is good, right? Or child exploitation, or drugs, or IP violations, or people inciting violence, or it's like most of the stuff is bad. People clearly believe that election interference and foreign government manipulation of content is bad. So we have this is the type of stuff that the vast majority of our energy goes towards that, and we're not changing our approach on any of that. The two categories that I think have been very politicized are misinformation, because who gets to judge or what's false and what's true? You may just not like my opinion on something, and then people think it's false, but I think that one's really tricky. And the other one is basically what people refer to as hate speech, which is I think also comes from a good place of wanting to crack down on that, of wanting to promote more inclusion and belonging, and people feeling good, and like having a pluralistic society that can basically have all these different communities coexist.
Accept everyone. Yeah.
But I think the problem is that all these things are on a spectrum, and when you go too far on them, I think on that side, we just basically got to this point where there were these things that you just couldn't say, which were mainstream discourse, right? So, it's like Pete Hegseth is going to, probably be defending his nomination for Secretary of Defense on the Senate floor. And I think one of the points that he's made is that he thinks that women shouldn't be able to be in certain combat roles. And until we updated our policies, that wouldn't have been a thing that you could have said on our platforms, because it would call for the exclusion of a protected category of people. And it's like, okay, like on its face, calling for the exclusion of a protected category, that seems that's okay. There's legal protections, there's all this stuff, but okay, if it's okay to say on the floor of Congress, you should probably be able to debate it on social media.
Yeah.
So I think some of the stuff, I think well-intentioned, went too far, needs to just get rationalized a bit. But it's those two categories, misinformation and hate speech, I think, are the ones that got politicized.
What brings you here?
All the other ones, which is the vast majority of the stuff that we do, is I think people generally agree that it's good and we need to go after it. But then you just get into this problem of the mistakes, like you're talking about. Okay, well, what confidence level do people want us to have in our enforcement? And at what point would people rather us kind of say, okay, I'm not sure that's that one is causing an issue.
Speak quickly,
So on balance, maybe we should just leave that person's account up, because the pain of just nuking someone's account when you're not sure or you make a mistake is that's pretty real too.
Right. Yeah. Very, very complicated.
Yeah.
It's all very nuanced. And you made a point earlier about the government supporting its companies, that it would be a good thing for the government to support its companies. It makes sense. It's an American company. I think the issue that we're dealing with is companies, as we're describing them, have never existed before, right? There's never been a thing like Facebook before. There's never been a thing like Twitter before, or X. There's never been a thing like Instagram. These are new things in terms of the impact that it has on society, on opinions, on conversations, on distribution of information. There's never been a thing like this that the government didn't control. So it makes sense from their perspective, continuing the patterns of behavior that they've always exhibited, which is to have control over the media. I mean, there has been CIA operatives that have been in major newspapers forever. There's always been that. There's always been this sort of input that the government had in mainstream media narratives. They are in a position now where they're losing that. They've essentially lost it. And especially with this the push during COVID deteriorated, as you were saying before, the opinion and the respect that people have for the facts that are coming from mainstream journalism in a way that I've never seen before in my life, where an enormous percentage of the population does not trust mainstream media anymore. So, well, what do they trust? They trust social media. Well, who's running that? Well, there are a bunch of people who figured it out and invented it. Well, no, fuck that. Like, we got to crack down on that. Like, we've got to get our hands on this, which is what we saw during COVID, which is what we saw during the Biden administration's attempt to remove the Hunter Biden laptop story from Twitter and from all these different things that we saw happen, the way they contacted you guys, what they're trying to do with getting you to remove real information about vaccine side effects, like that. This is like this new attempt to crack down on this new thing, which is a distribution outlet that's far more successful than anything they've ever controlled before, and they have no control of it, right? They had CBS, they had NBC, they had when they had the New York Times and all these Washington Post, when they were in control of narratives in that way, it was so much easier. There wasn't some sort of pirate radio voice that came on and said, hey guys, look, here's the latest studies that shows this is not true. Here's why they're lying about that. Here's why they're lying about this. And now that's what you get all day long on X. It's all day long is like dissolving illusions. And that's a completely new thing that probably led to Trump getting elected.
Yeah, I mean, the causality there is tricky, but because there's a lot of things. I mean,
Yeah, there's a lot of things.
I mean, it's
But without it, he probably doesn't get elected.
It's tough to know. I mean, I do come back to this point that every major incumbent lost their elections around the world this
But I
year.
think that's also
But it might be because of that revealing how kind of incorrect and dishonest I think some of these governments were.
Yes.
Yeah. So I think that's quite possible. And I mean, I do think that there is this cycle that goes on where, you know, within a society, it's not just the government that has power. There's like certain people who are in these like culturally elite positions, and you know, journalists, TV news anchors, like who are the people who people broadly trust, right? They're not all in government. They're like a lot of people in other positions. It's like who are the people that basically people look to, and I think that's basically it needs to shift for the internet age, and I think a lot of the people who people look to before, they're kind of realizing, hey, they weren't super honest about a lot of these issues that we face. And I think that's partially why, you know, social media isn't a monolithic thing. It's not that people trust Facebook or X. They trust the creators and the voices that they feel like are being authentic and giving them valuable information on there. So there's, I think, going to be just this whole new class of creators who basically become the new kind of cultural elites that people look at and are like, okay, these are the people who give it to me straight. And I think that's a thing that is, maybe it's possible because of social media. I think it's also just the internet more broadly. I mean, I think podcasting is obviously a huge and important part of that too. I mean, I don't know to what extent you feel like you kind of got to be large, like because of social media or just the podcasting platforms that you used. But I think that this is like a very big sea change in terms of like who are the voices that matter. And you know, what we do is we try to build a platform that gives people a voice. But I think that there's this wholesale generational shift in who are the people who are being listened to. And I think that that's like a very fascinating thing that is going on, because I think that that's like what's going on here. It's not just the government and people saying, hey, we want like a very big change here. I think it's just like a wholesale shift in saying we just want different people who we actually trust,
right?
Who are actually going to like tell us the truth and not give us like the bullshit opinions that you're supposed to say, but like the type of stuff that I would actually like when I'm sitting in my living room with my friends, like the stuff that we know is true. Like who are the people who kind of have the courage to actually just say that stuff? I don't know. I think that whole like cultural elite class needs to get repopulated with people who people actually trust.
Yeah. The problem is these people that are starting these jobs, they're coming out of universities, and in the universities they're indoctrinated into these ideas as well. It's very difficult to be a person who stands outside of that and takes unpopular positions. You get socially ostracized, and people are they're very hesitant to do that, and they would rather just keep their mouth shut and talk about it in quiet conversation. And that's what we experience, which is another another argument for anonymous accounts. I think you should have anonymous accounts. I think you should be able, like, if there's something like COVID mandates or some things that you're dealing with and you don't want to get fired because of it, you should be able to talk about it. And you should be able to post facts and information and what you've learned. And, anecdotal experiences of people in your family that had vaccine side effects, and not worry about losing your job, which people were worried about, which is so crazy. And, and you're seeing a lot of the people that used to be in mainstream media got fired, and now they're trying to do the sort of podcast thing. But they're trying to do it like a mainstream media person. So they're like gaslighting during podcasts, and people are like, hey, fuckface. Like, this, you can't do that here. It doesn't work.
Yeah, it's a new medium. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm sure you know the history on this. It's like when people transition from radio to TV, the initial TV anchors were the same radio people, but just like being filmed while speaking on the radio. But it turned out it actually was a completely different type of person that you need, because on your radio it's just like your voice and your cadence and all of that. It's like, the whole phrase, it's like you've got a good radio voice, right? It's like, okay, on TV you need to be telegenic, or you need to kind of have charisma in that medium. It's like a completely different thing. And I think that's going to be true for the internet too. It's not as cut, where I think part of it is the format, right? The fact that you do these like 2-3 hour episodes.
Can I assist you?
I hated doing TV because, I basically got started.
How may I help?
I started Facebook when I was 19, and I was good at some things, very bad at others. I was good at coding and like real bad at kind of like talking to people and explaining what I was doing. And I just like had these experiences early on where I'd go on TV and like it wouldn't go well, and they'd cut it to down to some random soundbite, and I'd like look stupid, and then basically like I'd get super nervous about like going on TV because I knew that they were just gonna cut it in some way that I was gonna look like a fucking idiot, and so I'm just like, this sucks, right? So I just like it's kind of a funny thing about like, it was like in some ways it's like, okay, at the same time I was gaining confidence, being able to like build more and more complicated products. And it's like, even as an early 20s person, I was like, I could do this. And then on the kind of TV and comms public side, I was like, this is a disaster. Every time I go out, it's worse and worse and worse. And it just gets, but I mean, it's one of the reasons why I think on the internet, like, there's no reason to cut it to a 4-minute soundbite conversation. It's like, I think part of what makes it authentic is like, we can just, I mean, these are complex issues. We can unpack it for hours and probably still have hours more stuff to talk about. It just, I don't know. I think it's just more real.
Yeah, it's definitely that. And the other thing about television that's always going to hold it back is the fact that every conversation gets interrupted every X amount of minutes because you have to cut to a commercial. So you really can't get into depth. Even Bill Maher's show is only an hour. You have all these people talking over each other, then you sit down with one person for a short amount of time. It's just not enough time for important subjects. It's also, a lot of them, for whatever reason, want to do it in front of an audience, which is the worst way to get people to talk. Like, when you imagine these disasters that you had if there was like 5,000 people staring at you in a TV crowd as well.
Yeah.
So there's that added element, which is so not normal and not conducive to having a conversation where you're talking about nuanced things.
Yeah.
Where you have to like think, you have to be able to pause and not concern yourself with being entertaining in front of these fucking people just sitting there staring at you.
Yeah, and also like when you're having a conversation, it like, I don't know, it's like when you start talking about something, your kind of subconscious kicks in, you start thinking about the topic. So it's like you might not actually have the thing that you want to say until like 5 minutes later.
Right.
I mean, it's like when we started this conversation, I think like the first few minutes were just kind of slow. It's like warming up. Like, I'm like, okay, kind of like downloading into my memory. Like, how am I going to like, it's like, how am I going to, just explain these different things. But it's, yeah, no, I just think that's sort of how people work.
What's also like, conversations are like a dance. One person can't be dancing at another speed and the other person's going slow. Like, you kind of have to find the rhythm that you're going to talk with. And then you have to actually be interested in what you're talking about. That's another thing that they are at a huge disadvantage of in mainstream media. Is like, they're just doing that because that's their job. They probably don't even know a lot about climate change. They probably don't really understand too much about what SpaceX is trying to accomplish, but they're just reporting on it.
Yeah,
know?
I mean, I'm sure there's. And a lot of the people I've met there, I think, are good people.
I'm
It's
sure
it's just
they
a
are.
tough format.
It's
right?
a
It's tough
terrible format. Yeah, and the problem is they get locked into that format and no one trusts them. And then they leave and they go, yeah, but you were just lying to us about this, that, and the other thing. And now I'm supposed to believe you're one of the good guys. You're one of the straight shooters now.
Yeah.
Well, getting back to the original point, this is why I think, it makes sense to me that the government didn't want you to succeed and to have the sort of unchecked power that they perceived social media to have. And I think one of the benefits that we have now of the Trump administration is that they have clearly felt the repercussions of a limited amount of free speech limitations, censorship, government overreach. If anybody saw it, look, I don't know what the actual impact of the Hunter Biden laptop story would have been. I don't know. But there's many people that think it probably amounted to millions of votes overall in the country of people that were on the fence, the people that weren't sure who they're going to vote for. If they found out the Hunter Biden laptop was real, they're like, oh, this is fucking, the family's fucking crazy. And they would have voted for Trump. That's possibly real. And if that's possibly real, that could be defined as election interference. And all that stuff scares the shit out of me. That kind of stuff scares the shit out of me. When the government gets involved in what could be termed election interference, but through some weird loophole, it's legal. Whereas some
Well, I don't think
interference,
that the pushing for social media companies to censor stuff was legal. I mean, it's like that's. I
Right.
mean, there's all this stuff about what, like, people talk about the First Amendment. And, okay, these tech platforms should offer free speech like the First Amendment. That I think is a philosophical principle. The First Amendment doesn't apply to companies in our content moderation. It's more of an American ethos about how we think that best dialogue is carried out. But the First Amendment does apply to the government. That's like the whole point, right? Is the
Right.
government is not allowed to censor this stuff. So at some level, I do think that having people in the administration calling up the guys on our team and yelling at them and cursing and threatening repercussions if we don't take down things that are true is like, it's pretty bad.
it sounds illegal. I
Pretty
would
bad.
love to hear it. I wish somebody recorded those conversations.
Well, I mean,
those would be
again,
fucking
it's
great to listen to. Somebody could animate them, maybe Polytune.
A lot of the material is public. I mean, it's Jim Jordan led this whole investigation in Congress. I mean, it was basically, I think about this as like, what Elon did on the Twitter files when he took over that company. I think Jim Jordan basically did that for the rest of the industry with the congressional investigation that he did. And we just turned over like all of the documents and everything that we had to them, and they basically put together this report.
And the people that actually did call for censorship, what was the response to all this?
To what? To the investigation?
Yes.
I don't know.
Was anybody held accountable? Was there any
I mean,
repercussions?
they lost the election.
Yes. So that's it.
That's
it.
Well, in a democracy, I mean, that's
Right.
kind of right.
Right, but if what they did was illegal, do you not think that some steps should be put in place to make sure that people are punished for that and that never happens again? It seems that has a massive impact on the way our country goes. If that's election interference, and I think it is, that has a massive impact on the direction of our country.
Yeah. Well, the COVID thing, I don't think was election interference as much as it was just like government meddling where it shouldn't have. But yeah,
Right.
no, I mean, it's
No, I'm
it's tougher,
talking about
it's
the Hunter Biden
tougher for
laptop
me to
story.
say, like what specific retribution or justice should happen to anyone who is involved in these things. But I think your point about let's make sure this doesn't happen again
Yeah.
is the one that I'm more focused on, right?
Right.
Because then it's the thing that I reflect on my journey on all this, which is like, okay, yeah, so we didn't take down the stuff that was true, but we did generally defer to the government on some of these policies that in retrospect I probably wouldn't, knowing what I know now. And I just think that's sort of the journey that we've been on, is like, okay, we start the thing focused on free expression, go through some like pretty crazy times in the world, get it pressure tested, see where we basically ended up doing stuff that led to a slippery slope that we weren't happy with the conclusion, and like try to reset. And that's sort of the moment that we're at now, is trying to just rationalize a bunch of the policies. And look, I mean, obviously crazy things can happen in the future that might unearth something that I haven't, some kind of angle on this that I haven't thought enough about yet. So I don't know. I'm sure I'm not done making mistakes in the world, but I think at this point we have a much more thorough understanding of what the space is, and I think our kind of values and principles on this are likely going to be much more durable going forward. And I think that that's probably a good thing for the internet.
I think it's a great thing for the internet. I was very happy with your announcement. I'm very happy that you took those steps. I'm very happy you brought Dana White aboard.
Oh, he's awesome. Been talking to him for
He's
a
the
while
best.
about that. I mean, he's like, talk about like an amazing entrepreneur, right?
Yeah.
It's like, I just want, like, because I control our company, I have the benefit of not having to convince the board not to fire me, right? It's like a normal corporate environment. It's like basically the CEO just tries to like, they're just trying to convince the board to like let them have their job and pay them more. It's like, all right, the board doesn't pay me except for security, and I'm not worried about losing my job because I control the majority of the voting in the company. So I actually get to use our board to like have the smartest people who I can get to have around me help work on these problems. So it's like, all right, who are the people I want? Like, I just want like the best entrepreneurs and people who've created different things. And like, I mean, Dana's like this guy who, I mean, he basically took the sport from being this like, I think it was viewed as like this pretty marginal thing when he got started, right? I mean, I think John McCain was trying to outlaw it, and now it's like, I think it and F1 are the two fastest growing sports in the world. It's got hundreds of millions of people viewing it. It's like, I mean, what Dana's done with the UFC is like one of the most legendary business stories, and the brand is beloved, and I think he's just so he's like a world-class entrepreneur, and he's just like he's got a strong backbone. And I think part of what the conversation that I had with him around joining our board was, okay, like, we have a lot of governments and folks around the world putting a lot of pressure on our company, and like we need some like strong people who are going to basically, help advise us on how to handle some of these situations. And so yeah, that's but yeah, I mean, running this company is not for the faint of heart. I mean, there's definitely a lot of pressure from like all these different governments, and then it's like, okay, I could spend all my time doing that, but I'm not even a politician. Like I just want to spend my time building things, right? So it's so yeah, I think Dana's gonna be great.
He's the best.
Great entrepreneur.
I agree with everything you said about him. Without him, none of the UFC would have ever taken place the way it did. I mean, you needed the Fertitta brothers. They had to come in with all the money and the vision, and it's really funny because Eddie Bravo and I, we've been fans for so long. Eddie Bravo and I went to a live event in the 90s. I was working for the UFC as a backstage interviewer, and he went there with Ricky Rocket. You know Ricky Rocket?
No.
From Poison?
No.
He's a fucking black belt under the Machados. He's legit. Super legit. Really nice guy, too. Anyway, so Ricky Rocket and him were at the UFC, and we were talking about it in the 90s. We're like, you know what the sport needs? Because we were in love with it. We're like, but we were martial artists. We were like, the sport needs some billionaires who just throw a ton of money at it and just get it huge. And then the Fertitta brothers come along, billionaires with a ton of money who are huge fans of the sport, just love the sport. We're hiring people like Frank Shamrock to come in and train them and work out. We're taking jiu-jitsu with John Lewis, and they were really getting into it. And so then they buy the UFC for like $2 million, which is probably the greatest purchase ever, except they were $40+ million in the hole when they financed the Ultimate Fighter. And then that was 2005, and then this one fight takes place with Stephan Bonner and Forrest Griffin on television. It's so wild and so crazy that millions of people start tuning in. The sport's born. Then you have Chuck Liddell, who was the champion at the time, who was the most fan-friendly champion you could ever have, just a fucking berserker, with just psychopath with a fucking head tattoo and a mohawk, crushing people. In his prime, he was the perfect poster guy for the UFC because he was just smashing people and then throwing his arms back like rah in a cage. It was nuts. I'm sure you've seen a lot of Chuck Liddell fights, right?
Yeah.
It was just the whole thing took off, but without Dana, it would have never taken place. The guy's tireless. That man, I could call him up. I'll call him up at like 2 o'clock in the morning sometime. Like there's some fight going on, and I'll say, hey, this is going on next weekend. I'm so fucking pumped, and we'll talk for hours. For hours. He just wants to talk about fights. He's like so locked in, like all the time, you know. And he's just like so driven. And now that he's healthy, like oh my God, he's got like, what Gary Brecka's done for him is incredible. He lost all this weight, got super thin, real fit, super healthy. He doesn't fuck around with alcohol anymore. He just eats healthy food. He looks great. Now he's getting even more energy.
Yeah.
It's incredible.
Well, we're lucky to have someone.
Yeah, we are. And you know what? We're also lucky that you got into jiu-jitsu. Because I think that had an effect on you. You look different. When you walked in here today, you look thicker. You look like a different guy. You do. You look like a jiu-jitsu guy now. It's funny. I saw your neck. I'm like, his neck's bigger. Your neck is bigger.
Good.
Are you using iron neck or is it just for training?
I do like iron neck. But it's but when I started training not just jiu-jitsu but striking, I was like, all right, I want to find a way to do this where I don't like hurt my brain, right? It's like, all right, like I need to I'm going to be running this company for a while. I would like to you know, like stay healthy and not take too much damage. And so I think the number one thing you need to do is, well, in addition to having good partners, is have a strong neck.
Yes.
So yeah, no, I take that pretty seriously.
It's very important. Strong neck is great for jiu-jitsu as well because it's a weapon. Like in certain positions, like head and arm chokes.
Yeah, head and arm.
You need a neck.
Yeah.
It's a weapon.
Yeah.
And you know, and also for defending things and just for overall stability. But for striking, it's very like Mike Tyson in his prime. He had a fucking 20-inch neck.
Yeah, no, it's crazy. His neck is like bigger than his
There's
face.
a photo of him in a suit.
Yeah.
It's the craziest photo. It's like his neck starts at the top of his ears and it just goes straight down.
Yeah,
when he was the champ, when he was a
he's
tank.
amazing.
Yeah. The neck's very important, but it's also like, you know, you're doing it very smart. You're bringing in Dave Camarillo.
He's
like,
awesome.
Amazing.
He's awesome.
You're bringing in all these like super talented people to train with you too, which is really important, and just learn systematically, probably the way you've learned all these other things, which is really so fascinating to me about MMA and jiu-jitsu in particular, is the general public has this knuckle dragging, meathead sort of perspective, and then I'm like, let me introduce you to Mikey Musumeci.
Yeah. Well, there's a range. There's a range from Mikey to...
But Mikey's one of the elite of the elite, and he's about as far from that.
I love Mikey. He's a
love
very good guy.
Super good guy.
Yeah.
He's super kind and unbelievably brilliant and eccentric and just so dedicated to jiu-jitsu.
Yeah. I'm glad that he's over at the UFC now.
Yes, I am too.
Yeah.
Well, I'm glad a guy like that exists. I'm like, okay, I know you think that. Let me show you this guy.
Yeah.
And then I'm like, let me show you what it really is. Let me introduce you to these people because they're the nicest people.
I know.
There's no better stress reliever in the world than jiu-jitsu or martial arts. There's no better. You leave there, you're the kindest person in the world. You just like heal all of your aggressions out of your system.
Yeah.
And it's a phenomenal stress reliever because regardless of what you're going through day to day with Facebook and Meta and all the different projects you have going on, it's not as hard as someone trying to choke you unconscious.
Well, it's not as acute. I think it's like sometimes you have someone trying to choke you unconscious slowly over a multi-year period, and that's business. But but no, I think that sometimes in business the cycle time is so long that it is very refreshing to just have a feedback loop that's like, oh, I like had my hand down, so I got punched in the face. It's like that's but yeah, no, it's really important to me for balance. I mean, I basically try to train every morning. I'm either doing general fitness or kind of MMA. I do sometimes grappling, sometimes striking, or sometimes both. But it got to the point where I tore my ACL training. I was probably at that point I wasn't integrated between my weight training and my fighting training, so I think I was probably overdoing it. So now we basically, I'm just trying to do this in a cohesive way, which I think will be more sustainable. But when I tore my ACL, first of all, everyone at the company was like, "Ah, fuck, we're gonna get so many more emails now." It's like that he can't do this. And then I sat down with Priscilla. And I expected her to be like, "You're an idiot. Like, what do you expect?" You're like, I was in my late 30s at the time, but she was like, "No." She's like, "When you heal your ACL, you better go back to fighting." And I'm like, "What do you mean?" She's like, you are so much better to be around now that you're doing this. You have to fight. And so
That's hilarious.
yeah, so
Isn't it funny that like that's completely contrary to the way most people, if they're outside of it, would perceive it?
I mean, it definitely takes the edge off things. Right? It's like after
100%.
like a couple of hours of doing that in the morning, it's just like, yeah, it's like nothing else that day is going to stress you out that
Yeah.
much, right? You can just deal with it.
Voluntary adversity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it's good. It's good. It's also good, I think, to be a little bit tired. Like it's like I love that feeling of just like you're not like exhausted. And sometimes you get a session and you just go so hard and I need to like just go to sleep or something. But
Yeah. It's also
but-
good to know that you can kill people. That's a good thing to know. It's a good thing to know if something goes sideways.
I guess
You
there's
can
a
choke
certain
someone's
confidence
life
from
out of
that.
them.
Yeah.
It's
yeah.
an important skill.
Yeah.
If you could give it in a pill, if you could sell it in a pill, everybody would buy it.
Yeah.
100%. No one would say, I'd like to be the vulnerable guy walking around with a bunch of fucking assassins.
Yeah.
No one would say that. They would say, how much is the pill? Oh, it's $2. Oh, give me one of those pills. You take the pill. Everybody would take that pill. Well, it
Yeah.
exists. It's just not a pill. It's a long journey of pain and discipline and trial and error and learning and being open-minded and being objective and understanding position and asking questions and having good training partners and absorbing information and really being diligent with your skill acquisition work, which is one of the most important and neglected parts of jiu-jitsu because training is so fun. Everybody just wants to roll. You know,
Yeah.
where really the best way to do it is actually to drill. And it's the most boring, but really you should drill constantly. Just jam those skills into your neurons where your brain knows exactly what to do in every position. And it's such an intellectual pursuit. And most people don't think of it that way because you have to manage your mind while you're moving your body. You're managing anxieties. You're trying to figure out when to hit the gas and when to control position and recover. There's so much going on in training that applies to virtually any stressful thing that you'll ever experience in your life. And along with it, you get this skill where you can kill people. You shouldn't kill people. Let me be clear.
No.
I'm not saying it's a good thing to kill people. I'm definitely not. But I'm saying it's a good thing to, if someone's trying to kill you and they absolutely can't, because you can kill them easy, that's way better. It's a way better situation to be in.
Yeah, no, it's great. I mean, it's opened a lot of how I think about stuff. I mean, it is just interesting. I mean, your point about like having a pill that allows you to just kind of know that you have this kind of physical ability. It's
a superpower.
It's interesting because I do think a lot of our society has become very like, I don't know, I don't even know the right word for it, but it's like kind of like neutered or like emasculated, and there's like a whole energy in this that I think it is very healthy in the right balance. I mean, I think part of the reason, one of the things that I enjoy about it is I feel like I can just like express myself, right? It's like when you're running a company, people typically don't want to see you being like this ruthless person who's like just like, I'm just gonna like crush the people I'm competing with. But when you're fighting, it's like, no, that's like, so I think
You're rewarded.
I think in some ways when people see me competing in this sport, they're like, oh no, that's the real Mark. It's like, because it goes back to all the media training stuff we were talking about when I'm going and giving my sound bites for 2 minutes. It's like, no, it's like, fuck that guy. It's like, that's the real one.
Well, you definitely got a lot of respect in the martial arts community. People got super excited that you were so involved in it and so interested in it because anytime someone like yourself or like Tom Hardy or anyone, they're like, wow, that guy's into it? Like, wow. Anytime something like that happens, there's like some new person who's a prominent person, a very smart person, that's really interested in it, we all get very excited because we're like, oh boy.
It's a very welcoming community.
Oh, super.
I think there's
Super
a
kind.
lot of sports that are like, nah, we don't want you.
It's not a jock community.
Yeah, no,
it's
no,
super
no.
kind.
Yeah.
Like jiu-jitsu people in particular, they're some of the nicest people. And this is my friends forever. You know, they'll be my friends for life.
Yeah. No, it's a good crew. I mean, when I got hurt, I really kind of missed the guys I trained with.
Oh,
I mean,
it
it's like
sucks.
Davis put together this group. It's basically these like all these young pro fighters who are kind of like up and coming, like kind of early 20s, but they've only been doing it for a few years. So like I've been doing it for for a few years. So that way, it's like we kind of have a more similar level of skill, and they're all better than me. But in terms of I was in my late 30s and they're in their early 20s. It was sort of like they're kind of coming into becoming men. I'm like sort of at the end of my physical peak, but it's a really good crew. Yeah, no, it's a good crew. And the competing thing is fun. I can't wait to get back to that too. I mean, it's like basically, I was also doing it with, so it was basically a group of pro fighters and then a handful of meta executives would do it. And basically we would just kind of like fight each other and it would be fun. And then one of them decided one day that they're like, I think I'm getting pretty good at jiu-jitsu. I'm going to go to a tournament. And I was like, all right, good luck with that, bro. Like, I'm not going to go to a tournament. It's like I don't want to go to a tournament and get embarrassed. It's like, but then so the guy goes to the tournament and he like does pretty well. I'm like, that guy? It's like, okay. It's like we go all the time and like, and if he's doing well in a tournament, that's like, all right, fine, sign me up, right? It's like, so it's just like super competitive. So this was like, when was this? It must have been, I don't know, I guess I rolled into this tournament and I registered under my first and middle name, so people didn't know who I was. And I had like sunglasses and a hat and I wore a COVID mask. And basically it was like, it wasn't until they called our names to step onto the mat that I was like, all right, take all this stuff off. And the guy was like, what? And
That's kind of a cheat code.
I mean,
because they kind of freak out.
I think he was trying to figure out what was going on. Afterwards, his coach was like, I think that was Mark Zuckerberg who just submitted me. And the coach was like, no way. And then it's like, no, I think that was. He's like, what? You're fighting Mark Zuckerberg? It's like, get back in there. It's like, go fight him. He's like, no, he just submitted me. It's
That's very funny.
Yeah, man.
Well, Tom Hardy's doing that too, right? He's done multiple tournaments now.
Yeah. No,
Yeah.
I think yeah. I can't wait to get back to competing. It's been sort of a slow journey on the rehab. It's sort of like learning twice, but we're getting there.
How far out are you?
Oh no, I'm done with the rehab now. Now I'm just ramping
How
back
far out are you from surgery?
12 months, 13
Okay.
months.
So you did the patella tendon graft, right?
I did.
Yeah. That's a rough one to come back from. I
Yeah.
did the patella tendon graft on my left knee, and it took me about a year. I did the ACL from a cadaver. It's actually, they use an Achilles tendon from a cadaver on my right knee, and I was back to jiu-jitsu in 6 months. Like
Yeah.
full confidence in 6 months. I was
Interesting.
100% recovered, kicking the bag, everything.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah. How old were you when you got those?
The first one, I was 26. The second one, I was 31, 32, somewhere around there.
Oh, so young.
Yeah.
Because my doctor is basically like, look, you're at the boundary. You could go either way, but if you want to compete again, then I'd recommend doing the patella.
Yeah, I know they say that. I don't agree with that. I mean, just from my own personal experience, my doctor told me that the ACL from a cadaver, when they use the patella tendon graft, is 150% stronger than your natural ACL.
Has no idea
He said
how
you'll
to
be
be
back to, because I didn't have any meniscus damage in my right knee. He's like, you'll be
Yeah, I
back to
didn't either. I didn't
100%.
either.
I have a lot of meniscus damage in my left knee, unfortunately, which is also part of the problem with the recovery of that one. But the patella tendon graft, the bone on the kneecap was painful forever. In terms of like getting on my knees, like training from my knees, doing certain positions, and even just stretching, like, putting my knees on the ground, sitting on my heels, and then laying back. It was fucking painful. It took forever to break all that scar tissue up. Now it's fine. It's fine now.
Yeah,
but
I
obviously
mean-
it's a long time ago.
Yeah, I can kind of do everything that I want at this point. It's still like a little sore, but I don't know. I think that it's supposed to be a couple years until you like feel like it's fully. I think it takes some time for the nerves to grow into it and all that.
Did you incorporate peptides into your recovery?
I didn't.
Do you hate healing?
Do I hate healing? No.
Why didn't you use peptides?
I don't know. I just took my doctor's advice on it. But
don't do that anymore.
I mean,
Next time, there's other people to talk to.
yeah. I mean, it's gone pretty well. It's gone pretty
I'm
well.
sure it goes pretty well, but
Yeah.
it would go quicker with
Yeah.
peptides.
Yeah.
100% for
Yeah.
sure.
But it's been this interesting opportunity to like like I really don't want that to happen again. So I feel like I'm so much more focused on technique. Like the first time that I learned all this stuff, I was probably like a little too brutish about it, and just like muscling through stuff. And now, I don't know. Now I feel like I'm like really learning how to do this stuff correctly, and I can do it way more effortlessly. So it's
that's the goal. How did
yeah.
it pop? How did it pop?
I was like the end of a session, and so we're 2 hours into training, and I was doing like a few rounds, and I basically threw a leg kick, and the other guy went to check it, and I like leaned back to try to get around the check and just put too much torque on my knee. So it was the planted leg,
free to
but
browse.
Mine was planted leg too.
yeah,
No
but
way.
it's I don't know. Dave was like, before that round, Dave was like, "You're done." I'm like, "No, one more round." It's
So
so
you're too tired as well.
yeah,
that's
and
how
I
did
basically
too.
and I hadn't I basically had also just done a really hard kind of like leg workout the day before, but I don't think the fight guys didn't know that, so I really just pushed it too hard.
Are you aware of knees over toes guy?
Yeah.
Have you done his stuff?
I've looked at it a bunch. I mean, the rehab thing I took really seriously, and I thought that was pretty interesting too. It's I don't want to like have to do a lot of rehabs like this one, but to do one of them, I actually thought was a pretty interesting experience because it's like week over week, you're just getting back so much mobility and ability to do stuff. And
Yeah.
no, I feel like I'm I don't know. At this point, I just like probably half my weight training is effectively kind of like rehab and joint health stuff and like wrists, shoulders, knee, all that in addition to the big muscle groups.
Yeah, that's very smart. The knee over toes guy stuff is particularly effective because it all comes from a guy that had a series of pretty catastrophic knee injuries and was plagued with weak knees his whole life, and then developed a bunch of different methods to strengthen all the supporting muscles around the knee that are really extraordinary. Everything from Nordic curls. Do you do those? Do you do Nordic curls?
I should do more than I do.
Yeah, leg curls, Nordic curls, but Nordic curls in particular because it's very difficult to do. You get your
Yeah,
body,
yeah,
you lift
yeah.
your whole body up with your hamstrings.
Yeah.
And all these different slant board squats and different lunges and split squats and all these different things which like really strengthen up all the supporting muscles around the knee better than anything that I've ever tried before. And he's got like a whole program where it scales up, and he puts it online for everybody.
Yeah.
And he gives away a lot of information for free because he said, look, when I was 11 years old, I wish I had access to this, so I'm going to put it out there for everybody. Great guy. Yeah.
Cool.
But I can't recommend that stuff enough. But I think what you're doing is like strengthening shoulders, strengthening knee. That's really the way to do it. Like you have to think of muscles in terms of like armor. If you want to do this thing, it's better to have good bumpers around your car if you might bump into other cars. You don't want to just have raw sheet metal,
Yeah. And I think a lot of people just focus on like the big movements and weight training, and it's I don't know. First of all, for like a lot of fighting type stuff, you kind of want to be loose and like not super tight. So, but yeah, I mean, I just think like the joint stability stuff is you get older and want to do this for a longer period of time. It's good to do.
Yeah, it's huge. It's mobility in general. It's just like so important.
You can compete in jiu-jitsu for a long time.
Sure.
There's like all these masters divisions and stuff, and
I see those old crazy looking 70-year-old dudes trying to kill each other.
yeah,
It's nuts.
it's great.
It is great, but for real, sincerely, we're very happy. I think I could speak, rarely do, but I think I could speak for the martial arts community. We're very
Oh.
happy you're bored. It makes it fun that someone is a prominent intellectual, very intelligent person who's really gotten fascinated by it, because it does help to kill that sort of knuckle dragger perspective that a lot of people have about the sport.
No, I think it's super intellectual in terms of actually breaking this stuff down. I mean, both jiu-jitsu and like striking. I mean, you don't have time to think, but like the reasoning behind why you kind of want to slip in certain ways and like the probability game that you're playing is, I don't know. I used to fence when I was in high school, and I did that pretty competitively. I was never like quite good enough to be like at the Olympic level, but I was pretty good. And
Yeah, we virtual fenced last time you were here.
yeah,
Remember?
there you go. And And like, I, you know, I just remember I would like sit in my classes in high school and like sketch out combinations of moves and sequences for how to like feint and like and kind of trick someone to get them out of position to be able to tap them. And it's I feel like this is like a game in the same way, right? It's like, I mean, I think when you're training, you're not like slugging at each other that much.
Right.
You're just like, you're playing tag.
Yeah, you're playing tag. Well,
Yeah.
the way the Thais do it, I think, is
Yeah.
the best.
Yeah.
And they're obviously some of the best fighters ever. They fight a lot, which is one of the reasons why they train the way they train. But when you talk to people that train over there, they're like, you learn so much more when you're playing. When you're
Yeah.
doing it, when you're not trying to hurt each other. Then you really do learn the technique, and it gets fully ingrained in your system.
Yeah. It's great.
Yeah, you just have to be careful of brain damage. Like you were talking about having an MMA fight. Are you still entertaining that?
I want to. I mean, this is my thing. It's like, and I think I probably will, but we'll see. I mean, it's 2025. I think is going to be a very busy year on the AI side.
Yeah.
And I think the idea of having a competition, you really need to like get into the headspace of like, I'm going to fight someone this week. And so I need to figure this out, because I don't know how, with everything that's going on in AI, I'm going to have like a week or two where I can just get into this, like, I'm going to go fight someone. But it's good training. But I would like to at some point. The thing about the ACL injury is I kind of thought before this, it's like, all right, I'm going to do some jiu-jitsu competitions. I want to do one MMA fight, like one kind of like pro or competitive MMA fight. And then I figured I'd go back to jiu-jitsu. But I think tearing the ACL striking is a little more of a fluke. I think you're much more likely to do that grappling. So going through the ACL experience didn't make me want to like just exclusively go do the version where you're just attacking joints all day long, right? So I'm like, all right, I can take a few more punches to the face before we go back to that.
You can hurt yourself doing both of them. There's really no rhyme or reason. I blew my left ACL kickboxing, my right ACL
My
jiu-jitsu.
goods are of the highest
Okay.
quality.
It
So
happens.
equal opportunity.
Yeah, I mean, this like
Only I
Tom Aspinall famously blew his out against Curtis Blades with a supporting leg, just threw a
Yeah.
kick, and his freak accidents.
Yeah.
Weird things happen. It's a lot of explosive force with striking, and sometimes that tears
luck,
things
friend.
more than
I
slow,
am honored.
controlled movements of jiu-jitsu, especially if you have good training partners.
Yeah, but jiu-jitsu isn't always slower controlled
Nope.
when especially when you're competing.
No,
It's-
especially when you're
yeah.
competing, unless you're really, really good. Like, have you ever watched Gordon? Like, Gordon never
Yeah.
moves fast. He doesn't have to. He doesn't
Yeah.
have to move fast. He's just like
Yeah.
always a step ahead of everybody. Yeah. Have you talked to him at all?
Oh yeah.
Did you talk to John Donaher?
No, I haven't.
You need to talk to John.
Yeah, no, I would be interested.
That's
in
the
that.
greatest mind in combat sports.
Now Gordon
I
is.
don't
Gordon is
say
very smart.
that lightly.
Yeah.
John Donaher is the greatest mind in combat sports.
Interesting. Interesting.
by far. He's a legitimate genius. You know the whole story, right? The guy was a professor of philosophy
Yeah.
at Stanford,
Yeah.
and or Columbia. Where was he? I forgot. The Columbia, I think
Columbia.
it was. And then decides, I'm just going to teach jujitsu all day. Sleeps on the mats, teaches all day long. You know,
Wears a rash guard anywhere he goes.
He's a freak, and he's so fucking smart, like scary smart about all kinds of things. It's not just jujitsu. You know, he's got a memory like a steel vice. Like he just holds on to thoughts and can repeat them. His recall's insane. He's a legitimate genius that became obsessed with jiu-jitsu. And what he's done with Gordon and with Gary Tonin and, you know, just a series of other athletes is nothing short of extraordinary. You know, just an interesting guy to have conversations with, too. Have you seen him on Lex's show? He's done a couple episodes of Lex's.
And I watched, I saw the one that you did with him.
Yeah, love the guy.
Yeah.
I mean, again, happy there's someone like that out there, because when people have these ideas of what martial arts are, and then you see a guy like that, and you're like, okay, why? I might have to rethink this.
Yeah, there's a whole spectrum of people.
Yeah. What has it done in terms of one of the things that a lot of people have said, and I have too, like nothing turns you into a libertarian quicker than jiu-jitsu. I don't know why that is. I think it's the hard work thing. It's the cutting out all of the bullshit and realizing how much of the things that we take as real things are just excuses and bullshit and weakness and just procrastinate. There's a lot of things that we have that exist, especially in like the business world and the corporate world and the education world, that are just bullshit. And they don't really have to be there. And they're only there to try to make up for hard work.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's kind of just what I was saying before. I think for me, it's just I think a lot of the corporate world is like pretty culturally neutered, and I just think like having, you know, I grew up. I have 3 sisters, no brothers. I have 3 daughters, no sons. So I'm like surrounded by girls and women like my whole life, and it's like, so I think I don't know. There's something, the kind of masculine energy I think is good, and obviously, you know, society has plenty of that, but I think corporate culture was really like trying to get away from it, and I do think that there's just something. It's like, I don't know, all these forms of energy are good, and I think having a culture that like celebrates the aggression a bit more has its own merits that are really positive. And that has been a kind of a positive experience for me. Just like having a thing that I can just like do with my guy friends and like, and it's just like we're just like beat each other a bit. It's good.
It is good.
Yeah,
I agree.
I don't know.
It's good. It just I could see your point though about corporate culture. When do you think that happened? Was that a slow shift? Because I think it used to be very masculine. And I think it was kind of hyper aggressive at one point.
No, and look, and I think part of the intent on all these things I think is good, right? It's I do think that if you're a woman going into a company, it probably feels like it's too masculine. It's like there isn't enough of the kind of the energy that you may naturally have, and it probably feels like there are all these things that are set up that are biased against you, and that's not good either, because you want women to be able to succeed and like have companies that can unlock all the value from having great people, no matter, you know, what their background or gender, you know. So, but I think these things can always go a little far, and I think it's one thing to say we want to be kind of like welcoming and make a good environment for everyone, and I think it's another to basically say that masculinity is bad. And I just think we kind of swung culturally to that part of the kind of the spectrum where, you know, it's all like, okay, masculinity is toxic, we have to like get rid of it completely. It's like, no, like it's both of these things are good, right? It's like you want like feminine energy, you want masculine energy. Like I think that's like, you're gonna have parts of society that have more of one or the other. I think that's all good, but I do think the corporate culture sort of had swung towards being this somewhat more neutered thing. And I didn't really feel that until I got involved in martial arts, which I think is still a much more masculine culture. And So, and not that it doesn't try to be inclusive in its own way, but I think that there's just a lot more of that energy there. And I just kind of realized it's like, oh, this
Well,
is
that's
like,
how you become successful at martial arts. You have to be at least somewhat aggressive.
yeah. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, I mean, there are these things. There are like a few of these things throughout your life where you have an experience and you're like, where has this been my whole life? And it just like
Yeah.
it just turned on like a part of my brain that I was like, okay,
Yeah.
like this was a piece of the puzzle that should have been there, and I'm glad it now is.
That I felt that way when I started hunting.
Oh yeah, hunting too.
Yeah, same
Yeah.
kind of thing. You've done a lot of that as well.
Yeah, well, so I mean, we have this ranch out in Kauai, and there's invasive pigs, and on our ranch we have there's a lot of albatross. I don't know if they're endangered or just threatened, and then there's the Hawaiian state bird, the nene goose, is that's I think endangered or at least was until recently, and like most of them in the world live in a small stretch, or at least most of them on Kauai live in a small stretch that includes our ranch. So you constantly have these pigs that are just like multiply so quickly, and we basically have to apply pressure to the population, or else they just get overrun and threaten birds and the other wildlife. And so, and what I basically explained to my daughters, who I also want to learn how to do this, because I just feel like it's like, look, we have this land, we take care of it, just like you mow the grass. We need to make sure that these populations are in check. It's part of what we do as like the stewards of this, and we've got to do it. And then if you have to kill something, then you should obviously treat it with respect, and use the meat to make food and kind of celebrate it in that way. But it's a culture that I think it's just an important thing for kids to grow up understanding, like the circle of life, right? So teaching the kids all of what is kind of how you'd run a ranch, how you'd run a farm. I think that stuff, it's good. I mean, because explaining to the kids what a tech company is really abstract, right? So for a while, my daughters were pretty convinced that my actual job was Mark's Meats, which is our kind of ranch and like the cattle that we ranch. I was like, well, not quite, and you'll learn when you get older. But I think that there's something that's just like much more tangible about that than taking them to the office and sitting in product reviews or something for some like piece of software that we're writing.
Well, it's certainly a lot more primal.
Yeah.
Yeah, and if you do wind up eating that meat from the animal, and you were there while the animal died, like you put it all together, like, oh, this is where meat comes from.
Yeah.
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 Which is another reason why things have become sort of emasculated, because that energy is not necessary anymore to acquire meat. That used to be the only way that people got meat. You had to go hunt it. So you had to go actually pull the trigger, kill the animal yourself, cut it up, butcher it, cook it. You knew what you were doing.
Yeah.
And
Although my favorite is bow and arrow.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's, I think, like the most, that feels like the most kind of sporty version of it.
Yeah, if you want to put it that way. Yeah. I mean, if you're just trying to get meat, it's not the most effective. The most effective is certainly a rifle. But I prefer it because it requires more of you.
Yeah, and you just kind of go and hang out. And
and you have to be fit.
Yeah.
Especially if you're mountain hunting, you have to be really fit.
Yeah.
You can't just be kind of in shape. You got to be really fit if you want to huff up the mountains and keep your heart rate at a certain level so that when you get to the top, you can execute a shot calmly.
And then actually carry the thing out.
Yeah, and carry the thing out.
Yeah, no, I mostly use a rifle just because it's so much more efficient. Your conversion rate is so much higher. But it's, but yeah, another.
What kind of bow do you have?
Gosh, I didn't get to do it this season, but
do you know the company that makes it?
Not off the top of my head. I have a few.
You have to know.
Yeah, no, this is embarrassing. This is embarrassing.
I can get you hooked up.
Yeah, it works.
Okay. Do you know how old it is?
No, it's not old.
Okay.
I think it's like just a compound bow that I got strung to my draw length. And
did you get someone to coach you?
Yeah.
Who coached you?
It's basically a bunch of the guys who help run security around the ranch.
Okay.
Yeah.
The thing about archery is, just like martial arts, one of the things that I learned when I was teaching is that it's way easier to teach someone that knows nothing than to teach someone who learned something incorrectly. The people who learned something incorrectly, the moment things got tense and they panicked, they went back to the old ways because it's sort of ingrained in their system. So archery, one of the things that's very important is proper form and then proper execution. Especially having a surprise shot, and learning how to have a surprise shot is.
What do you mean?
Yeah,
A
see,
surprise
you
shot?
don't know.
No,
See, that's
no.
this is the thing. In high pressure situations, one of the most important things is to have a shot process where you don't know exactly when the arrow is going off. You just have a process where you're pulling through the shot and the shot breaks. So it's a surprise shot. So you put the pin on the target. I use a thumb trigger.
Yeah.
I use a
I do too.
I use a thing called an onyx clicker.
Okay.
And the reason why I use the onyx clicker is like a hinge. It gives you a 2-stage of the trigger, right? So as I'm at full draw, I put slight pressure and I hear a click. And that click means it's ready to go off with more pressure. So I've gone through stage 1. Now stage 2 is just concentrating on the shot process and knowing it's going to break. And then there's no flinching. There's no tweak. There's no the thing that people do when they have a finger trigger. Where they twitch because your body is anticipating the shock of the bow. And when you're doing that, you can be off by 6 inches, 4 inches, 5 inches, all over the place because you're moving. You're moving while you're shooting. When you're doing it with a rifle, it's very different because obviously a rifle's far faster.
Yeah.
And then you have a scope. So you're zoomed in, many
Yeah.
magnifications, and all you have to do is just slowly squeeze. And if you're smart, you'll be prone, or you'll have your rifle rested on a tripod or something where you have a good steady. It's much easier. With a bow, it's very different because you're holding it with your arms, so you have to have the proper form, you have to have the proper posture, and then there's this thought process. And my friend Joel Turner, who is a sniper, created a whole system for people called Shot IQ. He's got this whole online system of developing the proper execution of a shot. When you see like tournament archers, when they go to Vegas, so what a Vegas tournament is, you have 3 targets and they have to shoot 30 arrows at a time. So they shoot 10 in this one, 10 in that one, 10 in this one. And the really good archers score an X every time. So they're in the center or close to the center. They're hitting the 10 ring every arrow for 30 arrows in a row. And then there's round after round, another 30 hours with new people, another 30 hours. And if you miss slightly, you get a 9, that's it. You're done. Because all these other guys are not going to get a 9. Very rarely will they. So it's the most 10s that you can get. And the best way to do that is with a surprise shot. So these guys have like these long stabilizers on their bow where they keep it totally steady. And it's all just about relaxing. And most of them use a hinge release. So a hinge, you know what a hinge is? Have you ever used one? Okay, instead of a button, where you press it, you're rotating the hinge, which activates
No,
a
I just
sear.
have a trigger.
Yeah. So you're just hammering the trigger. You're doing exactly what you're not supposed to do. You're
Really?
a trigger puncher. Yeah, you're a trigger puncher.
Your thumb?
Yeah, you're hitting it with your thumb, right?
Uh huh.
Yeah, I guarantee you, when you do it, your arm doesn't move.
Huh.
You go like this, like that. So with a good surprise shot, you shouldn't know it's going to go off. You're pulling, and then once the trigger breaks off, your arm will naturally go backwards because you're not anticipating the shot.
I'm definitely not doing that.
Yeah. See, that's the thing.
But how far away are you shooting this from?
It depends. That elk out there, the photograph that's in the front, that one I shot. It's in the front of the building when you walk in before you go into the studio. There's a mounted head and then a photograph of me and my friend Cam. That one was 67 yards. I shot one at 79 yards once, but that's rare. Most of the time, it's like, for me, my effective range, where I'd like to be is 60 yards and in.
Yeah, because I was gonna say I don't think I've ever shot something more than 50 yards out.
Yeah, it's hard.
Yeah, so
You
I
gotta
think
be
that
really, your form has to be tight. You have to be really confident. You have to have a lot of arrows downrange, and then you have to be able to stay calm during the shot. So now imagine if you're shooting something at 18 yards, okay, and you hammer the trigger, a little bit of this, a little bit of that, you're still gonna get there.
Yeah.
Right, because it's only 18 yards. So
Yeah.
the amount of deviation off the path that it takes in 18 yards is significantly different than the amount of deviation at 105 yards. It's a huge gap. It might be 2 feet to the right.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, you thought you were shooting accurately because you were inside of like a pie plate at 20 yards. And the difference between that is form, technique, and a shot execution process, and also management of the psychology of the shot. Because there's this one moment, here it comes, here it comes, now. And if you only do that once a year, like say if you go on one big elk hunt a year, you save up all your money, you get your gear all ready, you get your arrows weighed, practice, and then you're in the mountains for 10 days, and on the 11th day, you get this animal that moves. It's at 57 yards, it stands there, and you're like, your heart's beating, you just might hammer that trigger. You just might hammer it. So you have to have this shot process, and where you're literally talking to yourself inside your head. You have words that you say that occupy your thoughts while you're going through the shot process so that you never get overcome by shot panic.
Interesting.
Because target panic is a giant thing in the archery